Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'll be covering my top 10 board games that involve conflict. These are conflict-heavy, conflict-driven board games that I love and adore. Now, I do have to say something before going any further, and that's that I don't normally tend to gravitate towards conflict-heavy games. Most of the games that are ranked as my favorite board games of all time have little to no conflict in them. However, there are a few outliers, a few exceptions to the rule, board games that I love and adore that do rank highly within my overall games of all time that involve a healthy dose of conflict. Now, as I was making this list and taking my short list and ranking the games, the things that I looked for are, first of all, how much I enjoy the game. The more I enjoy the game, the more likely it's ranked higher. Second of all, how much I enjoy the actual conflict. Not necessarily how I objectively appreciate the conflict, whether or not it's mechanically or intellectually stimulating, but just how much fun I have as I'm engaging in that conflict. Does the conflict in this game make me forget my predisposition against conflict, my tendency to disdain and feel uncomfortable with conflict, right? If these games make me immerse myself in the gaming experience and enjoy even these moments of tension and conflict, then they're going to rank higher for me on the list. And also the final piece of it is, are these games multiplayer experiences? Because in a two-player game, it doesn't feel the same, right? It's that decision of whether or not you're going to enter into conflict, engage in conflict, and who you're going to engage in conflict with. These are the things that make a conflict-oriented game interesting. Now, with that being said, we're going to move straight into my top 10, and my number 10 conflict-oriented board game of all time is Bang the Dice game. And this game has a lot of things going on. You've got some social deduction. This is a Wild West themed game. One player is the sheriff, and every other player on the table has a hidden role. You could either be the sheriff's deputy, or you could be some of the outlaws trying to kill the sheriff, or you can be a renegade, or maybe even a second renegade trying to win the game all by yourself by outlasting everybody and having a final duel with the sheriff at the end of the game. Now, as the game is going on, each player is trying to decipher who is who, and the sheriff in particular is really trying to figure out who's on his side, who's in between, and who's totally against him. For example, the outlaws. Every player has a specific individual character that gives them a special ability unique to him or her. And for the most part, mechanically speaking, you're just rolling dice. These dice do different things for you. They inflict damage on yourself sometimes. If you roll dynamite, beer gives you more energy. There's certain other things that you could do, but primarily you're attacking players, and the dice tell you how many spaces away around a table can you attack someone. If you roll a 1, you could shoot someone who's next to you, either to your left or your right. If you roll a 2, you can shoot people who are 2 spaces away from you. And then making the decision as to who you're going to shoot based on limited information, based on some hunches, based on some people's poor body language. These are the crucial decisions that come in the game. I enjoy it. Nice, simple dice rolling, a little bit silly and lighthearted, but at the same time, it can, lead to some very fun combat, one-sided combat, because nobody could defend against you. However, they can pay you back when it's their turn. My number 10 conflict-oriented board game, Bang the Dice game. And now we move on to my number 9, and that is Tigris and Euphrates. And this is one of those classic Euro games that involve a heavy amount of conflict. I mean, for the most part, this is a Euro, pure, Euro through and through. Tile placement, set collection, scoring victory points. In this game, Reiner Knizia, this is designed by Reiner Knizia, introduced what's known to some as the ingenious mechanism, where you're scoring points in 4 different sets of colors, and the set in which you score the least amount of points, that's actually your final score. So you're trying to build evenly as possible and not neglect any one area. But this is basically a civilization themed game, but it's very abstracted. You're just placing tiles to create your own little kingdoms on the board. And sometimes these kingdoms merge. And when they merge, a battle takes place. And your leaders of a certain color go to war against your opponent's leaders of a certain color. And this game, even though it plays very fine 2 players, you can play it 3 or more players. And that adds a few wrinkles to the potential combats and wars that take place. And it's so neat because basically you're counting for majority on the board in these colors that you're fighting. So for example, if you're having a battle with your green leaders, you're going to count how much support in your kingdom before it was merged does your green leader have with the green tiles on the board. And then you're going to look at your opponent and how much on their part, their kingdom before it was merged, how much support does their green leader have with the green tiles on their board. And you're going to add up the totals and compare them. And then finally, the attacking player can add from a hand of 6 tiles that nobody knows what they are. They can add to that war by throwing in more green tiles, let's say, to add to their total. And then finally, the defender has one last chance to add from his or her hand of tiles more green tiles. And then finally, you compare the final results. Defender wins ties, but if the majority goes to the attacker, if they have more, and basically you suffer the casualties. You lose your leaders, you lose all the supporters that you had in that color. The person who won the battle is going to collect victory points equal to the amount of casualties that were had. Really, really fun, really neat, really cool, but a very brutal game. A one-on-one player game can have a runaway leader problem if a player gets off to an early start. The end game score might not look like they ran away with it, but the feel and the spirit of the game can have that feeling of, man, do I really have a chance of winning? This person is annihilating me in every category or in every color. But it's a fun game. When the game is competitive, it's really tight, it's really sweet, and it's really fun. My number 9, conflict-oriented board game of all time, Tigris and Euphrates. And now we move on to my number 8, which is theoretically a tie between 2 games, and that is Star Realms and Hero Realms. And these are deck building games, but they're deck building games a la Magic the Gathering, where players have a certain amount of life or authority as a player, and you're building your deck to come up with different combos that allow you to sum up lots of attack power so that you can attack your opponent's authority or their life and eventually knock them out to win the game. I did include this game because even though typically I play a 2-player, it can be played 3 or 4-player, and it does play well, and you do have the option as to who you're gonna attack in these games. Now, again, you build these powerful combinations to attack your opponents, but you also have some base cards, or in the case of Hero Realms, you have champion cards, and they serve as a buffer, as a line of defense between, one player and the other player, the human player. So they absorb some of the hit and the damage that the other player's hands might cause. So building a lot of bases and all that stuff, and playing some cards that also allow you to increase your authority or your health so that you could get to full health and hopefully last long enough to beat your opponent. Really fun. I'm a big fan of deck building games. I love the idea of, building a deck, starting with a weak deck and acquiring cards throughout the course of the game, culling weak cards, and eventually getting a very efficient and predictable, to some extent, obviously shuffling is a randomizer, but to some extent a predictable engine that you know what you could do with. And in this game in particular, what you're doing is you're attacking. And it works. It works just fine in this game. My number 8, conflict-oriented board game of all time, a tie, Hero Realms and Star Realms. Now we move on to my number 7, and that is Small World. And this game here has deterministic combat. It's basically an area control game where players control different races. And really the key of this game, the intricate part that makes it special and stand out, is not the conflict. It's really the selection of different fantasy races and their different player powers that combine to make you unique from somebody else and give you special benefits and abilities that nobody else on the board has. And throughout the game, you're putting them in decline, and you have to find the right timing to decline your race and invest into a new race. That's really the heart and the bread and butter of this game. However, the conflict is how you get control of the areas, and that's how you score points. And what's interesting about this game is, as I mentioned earlier, it's deterministic. Basically, you have a group of tiles in your supply that are your troops, your units, so to speak. And as long as you can contribute more units than there are in a given territory, plus whatever that territory has as a standard number that you have to outdo. For example, I think it's 2. You have to have 2 to conquer any territory. Plus you add however many units an opponent has. As long as you have enough to outdo that number, or I think it might be even to equal that number, you enter into that area. So every time you do an attack in Small World, you actually know that you're going to succeed. As a matter of fact, as your troops dwindle down towards the end of your turn, you might have one situation, your last conflict, where you don't have enough tiles to actually enter that area, but you do have a die that if you roll the right numbers, you could either roll a blank, a 1, a 2, or a 3. Those numbers will be added to your units, and it would give you enough in order to conquer that territory. So only that last conquest on a player's turn is randomized and left up to chance or to luck. Every other decision throughout a player's turn is deterministic, and you know exactly what you're going to get. And I guess that's why I do like the conflict in this game, because I don't do well with dice rolling in particular. I feel like dice hate me, and I have very unfortunate luck. Unfortunate luck? I don't know, that's a oxymoron. I'm very unfortunate in board games when it comes to dice rolling, right? When there's no sort of dice mitigation. So I like the idea that I have in control. I can make my decisions. I could be as conservative as I want. I don't need to feel like I'm being risky or careless, you know, in my decision making. However, this game doesn't rank higher because I do like it, but I don't necessarily love it. And the games above it, I like a lot more. So that's why it's only my number 7 conflict-oriented board game, Small World. Now we move on to my number 6 conflict-oriented board game, and that is Descent, Journeys in the Dark, designed by Corey Konieczka, I believe this edition is, the second edition, Adam Sadler and Daniel Clark. And this is published by Fantasy Flight Games. This is an amazing dungeon crawler RPG style board game, campaign oriented. You know, you have a bunch of different campaigns with all the different expansions. You go through these different quests and these different encounters, trying to accomplish things. You're doing lots of stuff going on. You're searching, you're acquiring, you know, resources and equipment and things along the way. But basically what's happening a lot in this game from turn to turn is players are attacking each other. One player takes the overlord, and the other players are working cooperatively as a band, a team of heroes, trying to accomplish the quest. But there is a lot of conflict going back and forth. The heroes are attacking the monsters of the overlord, and the overlord is using his monsters or her monsters to attack the heroes. So there's a lot of dice chucking, a lot of dice rolling. You know, you're rolling a couple of dice based on your characters and their powers and their abilities, whether they're melee, whether they are range and all that stuff. You're factoring those things in. You can roll complete misses, which are very frustrating and painful. The way the dice roll, it shows how much damage you inflict. It shows how much range you have, depending on how far you might be if you're a ranged attacker. So you're factoring all these things in. You have some special cards, equipment cards sometimes, or skill cards for the heroes. The overlord has an overlord deck of cards, and some of these things can help mitigate some of the dice rolls, or at least give you the opportunity to maybe re-roll some of these dice rolls if they don't go your way. So this is definitely lots of dice rolling to resolve conflict, but it works. I like how it works. It feels fun. There's so many other things going on in the game that even if for whatever reason the dice rolling is not going in your favor, the way to accomplish or successfully complete a quest, or in the case of the overlord, to prevent the heroes from successfully completing a quest, there's so many things within your grasp and within your control that you can do to accomplish those objectives, that even again, if conflict doesn't necessarily go your way, you can still work a way around it. But when you do get those hits, when you do get those crits, when you're getting those rolls that just absolutely, you know, are sensational and obliterate your opponents, those are exciting moments. And sometimes even when you're the one being obliterated, you can have fun. My number 6 conflict-oriented board game of all time, Descent, Journeys in the Dark, second edition. And now we move on to my top 5, the cream of the crop. And my number 5 has a good chance of climbing up with repeated play, and that is Game of Thrones, the living card game, designed by Eric Lang and Nate French, published by Fantasy Flight Games. And this is the only living card game I included out of all of my top favorite living card games for this list, because first of all, I like this is a 2 to 4 player game. Lots of these other card games that I play, living card games, CCGs, LCGs, are 2-player only games. So again, for this list, I was factoring games that could accommodate 3 or 4 players, where there's some selection and some choice going on as to who you're going to attack. Also, I just like the intricate system here where when you're attacking, there's 3 different spheres of influence in which you could attack. You have power, you have intrigue, and you have war. These are the 3 different spheres. And you get to pick and choose based on the characters you have, based on the characters that your opponents might have, where you think they might be vulnerable. You rotate a card or tap it to indicate that you're activating it for attack. You choose which sphere. Your opponent or opponents choose which defenders they use from the characters on their tableau. And then you compare the numbers and resolve who wins or who loses. And whatever benefits or casualties need to be met will be met. It's fun. It's interesting trying to just map out your turn, factor in, speculate and anticipate as to what decisions your opponent are going to make when they're on the defensive. Also get ready for, upcoming turns when your opponents might be the aggressor, when it's their turn to do the attacking, what's going to happen, what's going to be left on the tableau once they're the ones coming to attack. There's a bunch of different cards, event cards and other specialty cards that, adjust and modify different decisions that are made throughout the game. You have these plot cards that basically add special rules to each given turn, each given round in the game, and affect how much money you have, because the money you have lets you know what cards may or may not be played from your hand. Really fun. I just love the way this game is executed. I'm starting to get a little bit into the intellectual property. And again, I've only played this game a handful of times. I need to get into the table more because it's a very enjoyable game, and it's my number 5 conflict-oriented board game of all time, Game of Thrones, the card game. And now we move on to my number 4, and it's Jamaica. And this game is a phenomenally fun pirate-themed family game where players are racing around the island of Jamaica, trying to be the first player to make it all the way around to Port Royal. If you make it to Port Royal, you get 15 points, which means you have a really, really good chance of winning the game. But it's not a guarantee because there's other things going on. You're going to secret treasure caves throughout the board, trying to acquire treasure, but it's always a risk because you do have a chance of maybe getting a curse instead, which will be negative points. You're also collecting coins along the way. You're snatching coins away from your opponents as you engage in combat. And again, this is what it's about. It's about conflict oriented. Sometimes you're programming your turns consist of programmed action selection, where you are programming your card before everybody executes it. So you have an idea of what things are going to look like, but until everybody goes, you don't really know, right? So you might end up in someone else's space. You don't know that, but you could anticipate it. And when you do, when 2 pirates end up in the same space, 2 pirate ships, they must engage in combat. And throughout the game, one of the resources you're acquiring is gunpowder or cannon tokens, which you can add to your dice total when you roll off to resolve conflict. However, you need to add those cannons before your roll, so you don't know what's going to happen. Also, one of the sides on the conflict die, on the combat die, is a star, which is an automatic hit. So sometimes you can roll an amazing roll, have a bunch of cannons added, feel very confident, but that other opponent still has an outside chance, because if they roll that star, they get the automatic win, and whoever wins gets booty from one of the holds within the other opponent's ship board, and they get it for their possession going forward. Really fun, really cool, lighthearted combat in the midst of what's a very fun racing game. My number 4 conflict-oriented board game of all time, Jamaica. And now we move on to my number 3, and it's Pirates Cove. Yet another pirate game, back-to-back pirate-themed games for this. Pirate-themed games just kind of lend themselves to conflict, and the theme makes it feel so lighthearted. It's like, I'm a pirate. What else am I supposed to do? Don't take it so personal. I have nothing against you. I'm a pirate. This is what I do for a living. I pirate. I plunder and I pillage and I take things away from people. It's nothing about you. It's about me, right? So this game is so much fun because basically the way you manage conflict, very similar to Jamaica in the sense that when 2 pirate ships occupy the same spot on the board, that's when they engage in conflict. Very similar to Jamaica, where there's some type of programming action going on before the round begins. And then after the programming is executed, that's when you know exactly where everybody will be. But again, you can anticipate and plan and speculate. But once the battle goes on, it's all a matter of how upgraded your pirate ship is. And that's one of the things you're doing throughout the game. You're upgrading the different sections of your ship. And 2 of the sections that correspond to battling is your cannon section and your crew section. And wherever the common denominator of the two meet, that's how many dice you roll. And basically, whoever's the fastest ship, so whoever has the ship, I'm here like simulating, like if I'm looking at let me show you what I'm talking about. Whoever has the fastest ship, the most developed sails here on the top part of their ship, that means that they get to engage in combat first. So they might not be the most powerful ship, they might not roll the most dice, but they might get the first crack, right? And every time a player gets the opportunity to do their turn of attacking, they have two choices. They could either run away and give all the remaining players a victory point for them fleeing from battle. They go to Pirates Cove where it's nice and safe. Or again, they could roll their dice equal to the common denominator between their crew and their cannons and where they meet. And again, you're attacking back and forth. You always have that opportunity to run away and to flee at the expense of giving a victory point to your opponents. You also have some special battle and volley cards that you could play during your turns that add some different conditions to the battle and might benefit you or even hurt other players or hurt yourself, even hurt everybody sometimes, in order to modify and spice up the attack. The attacking here is fun. It's usually resolved very quickly. And again, you do have that opportunity if you feel like you don't have a chance, if you want to play it safe, to run away, right? So again, very fun, lighthearted execution of combat. My number 3 combat-oriented board game of all time, Pirates Cove. And now we move on to my number 2, and that is King of Tokyo, the very popular Yahtzee-style game where players are fighting for supremacy over Tokyo. They each control a monster represented by a cardboard standee. You're rolling dice Yahtzee-style. And there's 2 victory conditions. Either become the first player to get to 20 victory points or eliminate all opposition through, combat. And I've never won through combat. I don't think I've ever even tried winning through combat. And that's one of the reasons why this game is ranked number 2 for me, because I love the fact that I can just play this game almost like a Euro and just focus on getting victory points while other players may be trying to annihilate me. And of course, I got to make some time and some decisions in order to, regain my strength, heal my damage in order to last long enough to get to those 20 victory points. But even the conflict in this game, when I engage in it, when I watch others engage in it, it is very fun. This leads to so many, OMG moments, so many laugh out loud moments, so many moments where people are cheering, jumping, standing on the edge of their seats. Such exciting, clinching moments where you're like, this person has a chance of winning on this turn if they roll such and such, but if they don't, then the next player is pretty much a given to win this game. And those moments add for so much excitement, so much storytelling. It's memorable experiences that you never forget. And that's why this is my number 2 conflict-oriented board game of all time, King of Tokyo. And finally, the King of the Hill, the number 1 conflict-oriented board game of all time, Cosmic Encounter. Science fiction game. Players are trying to, they own their own system of planets, and they're trying to establish colonies in 5 foreign planets. The fun part of this game is, first of all, you don't necessarily have to be cutthroat. There's so much negotiating that you can make as you're trying to acquire those different colonies and other players' planetary systems. But also, there's a lot of alliance making, right? You join forces with lots of people, and sometimes those alliances are broken and betrayed, right? But it's fun to see how things carry out. And again, from a storytelling perspective, it's really neat. And then the combat resolution is a simple card play, but I like the card play because you have these numbered cards. And as you play the game more often, you kind of memorize how much cards each number there are in the deck, right? And you know your chances of winning. Also, these numbers are modified by how much alliances you have. How many ships were contributed to this battle from your end? How many ships does the defender have from their end and from their alliances? You're factoring all these things in as you make your decisions. Also, each player has a special alien power, and quite often the alien powers are directly related to the conflict. Not always. Sometimes the alien powers are related to some other aspect or feature of the game, but quite often they are related to the conflict. So even engaging with that alien power and finding how it can be advantageous to you, how can it be most efficiently executed and utilized in order to optimize your combat from turn to turn is absolutely neat. The fact that you don't necessarily need to be the active player, the current player, having the current player turn in order to be involved in the conflict, because again, players can, seek your services and ask you to join forces with them, to form alliances with them in order to compete and combat with somebody else. Love the fact this game has you involved and immersed from turn to turn. Every single turn, you have something to do, even if it's just utter a few words. You're involved, and every single turn matters to you as a player. And again, talk about story, like I said with King of Tokyo, this game always creates a story, always leaves lasting impressions and lasting memories that people talk about for years and years to come. And that's exactly why it's my #1 conflict-oriented board game of all time, Cosmic Encounter. And that's it, folks. Those are my top 10 conflict-oriented games of all time. Please comment down below in the comment section. Tell me what you think about these 10 games. Which ones surprised you? Which ones impressed you the most? Which ones are you disappointed by, perhaps? Which ones do you want to try, haven't tried before, but are curious about? I am interested in reading what you have to say. Well, this is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games, everybody, saying take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.